Sometimes, the people we trust most are the ones who see us only for what we can offer them. This is a story about betrayal, resilience, and the sweet taste of justice served cold on a Christmas evening. What started as a festive dinner turned into a moment that would change everything, revealing the true nature of those sitting around the table and proving that underestimating someone can be the biggest mistake of your life. Before we begin this incredible story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Your support means the world to us. My name is Catherine, and I'm 38 years old. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I would be sitting in an elegant restaurant on Christmas evening, watching my husband hand me divorce papers in front of his entire family, I would have laughed. But life has a way of teaching us lessons we never expected to learn. The restaurant was one of those places where every detail screamed luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the perfectly set tables. The walls were decorated with tasteful Christmas garlands, and a live pianist played soft holiday melodies in the corner. The air smelled of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and expensive, wine. Everything looked perfect from the outside, just like my marriage had appeared to everyone for the past 8 years. I sat at the head of the long table, wearing a navy blue dress that I had carefully chosen for the occasion. My hair was styled in soft waves, and I had put on the pearl earrings my mother had given me years ago. I wanted to look composed, elegant, even though inside I felt like I was walking on broken glass. Around me sat my husband Richard, his mother Eleanor, his brother Thomas, with his wife Jennifer, and their 2 teenage children. The waiter, a young man with slicked back hair and a professional smile, hovered nearby, ready to attend to our every need. Richard sat across from me, looking more confident than I had seen him in months. He wore a dark suit that I had bought him last year, and his hair was perfectly combed. There was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place at first. It wasn't love, or even the familiar indifference I had grown accustomed to. It was something colder, more calculated. He kept glancing at his mother, as if seeking approval for something. The evening had started pleasantly enough. We ordered appetizers and exchanged polite conversation about the weather, the holiday decorations, and the upcoming new year. Eleanor dominated most of the conversation, as she always did, talking about her charity work and the latest gossip from her country club. Jennifer nodded along, occasionally adding comments about her children's achievements. I smiled and participated when expected, but my mind was elsewhere. For months, I had felt the distance growing between Richard and me. He had become secretive, spending long hours away from home, claiming he was working on important business deals. Our conversations had become superficial, limited to household matters and social obligations. The warmth that once existed between us had evaporated, replaced by a cold formality that made me feel like a stranger in my own marriage. What Richard didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been through something transformative in the past year. My small consulting business, which I had started from our spare bedroom 5 years ago, had exploded beyond my wildest expectations. A major corporation had acquired my proprietary software system, and the deal had made me wealthier than I had ever imagined possible. But I had kept this information private, sharing it only with my lawyer and financial advisor. I had my reasons for discretion. You see, I had noticed how Richard's interest in me seemed to correlate directly with my professional success. When I first started my business, he was supportive, even encouraging. But as I became more successful, as my income began to surpass his, I noticed subtle changes. He became more critical, more dismissive of my work. He would make comments about how I was neglecting our home, how I was becoming too focused on money, how I was changing into someone he didn't recognize. Then, about 6 months ago, I had deliberately planted some false information. I had mentioned to Richard in passing that my business was struggling, that a major client had pulled out, that I was facing financial difficulties. I wanted to see how he would react, what his true character would reveal when he thought I was no longer the successful woman he had married. His reaction had been telling. Instead of offering support or encouragement, he had become increasingly distant. He started making comments about how he needed to think about his own future, how he couldn't be expected to carry both of us financially. He stopped asking about my work altogether and began spending even more time away from home. As the appetizers arrived, Richard cleared his throat. The table fell silent, and everyone turned to look at him. Eleanor set down her wine glass with a satisfied smile, as if she knew what was coming. Thomas leaned back in his chair with an expression of barely concealed smugness. Jennifer pretended to be interested in adjusting her napkin, but I could see her eyes darting between Richard and me with curiosity. My heart began to beat faster, though I kept my expression neutral. I had suspected something was planned for this evening, something beyond a simple family dinner. Richard had been too insistent that we come to this particular restaurant, too specific, about the date and time. He had even suggested I dress formally, which should have been my first warning. The waiter approached with the main courses, placing them carefully in front of each person. The turkey looked magnificent, perfectly golden and garnished with herbs. The side dishes were arranged with artistic precision, but I barely noticed the food. My attention was focused on Richard, who was reaching into his jacket pocket with a deliberate slowness that made my stomach turn. He pulled out a large manila envelope and placed it on the table between us. The sound it made as it hit the white tablecloth seemed impossibly loud in the suddenly quiet restaurant. The pianist continued playing, oblivious to the drama unfolding at our table, but everyone at our table had stopped moving, stopped talking, stopped even breathing, it seemed. Richard looked at me with an expression that was meant to appear regretful, but came across as barely suppressed triumph. He glanced once more at his mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly, and then he spoke. His voice was clear, loud enough that I was certain nearby tables could hear. "Catherine, I think we both know that things haven't been working between us for a long time. You've changed. Your business troubles have put a strain on our relationship that I don't think can be repaired. I've tried to be understanding. I've tried to be patient. But I can't continue living like this. I deserve better. I deserve someone who can be a true partner, not a burden." I felt the words hit me like physical blows, but I kept my face composed. Years of business negotiations had taught me never to show weakness, never to let others see when they had wounded you. I reached for my water glass and took a small sip, buying myself a moment to process what was happening. Eleanor jumped in before I could respond, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Dear, we all understand how difficult this must be for you, but you have to see things from Richard's perspective. He's a successful man with a bright future ahead of him. He can't be dragged down by someone who's struggling. It's nothing personal, you understand. It's just practical." Thomas added his contribution, his voice pompous and self-important. "Richard has been suffering in silence for months, trying to protect your reputation. But enough is enough. A man has to think about his own well-being. You can't expect him to sacrifice his entire future just because your business ventures didn't work out." Jennifer made a small sound that might have been sympathy, or might have been satisfaction. Their teenage children looked uncomfortable, staring down at their plates, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. I felt a brief moment of sympathy for them, being forced to witness this cruelty disguised as a family dinner. Richard pushed the envelope closer to me. "I've had my lawyer draw up divorce papers. Everything is straightforward. I'm not asking for much, just what's fair, given your current financial situation. I think you'll find the terms quite reasonable. I'm even willing to help you get back on your feet after everything is finalized. I'm not a monster, Catherine. I want to do this civilly." The audacity of his words almost made me laugh. Here he was, serving me divorce papers in public, saw us on Christmas evening, surrounded by his family who clearly knew this was coming, and he wanted credit for being civil. He thought I was destitute, helpless, that I would be grateful for whatever scraps he was willing to throw my way. I looked around the table at their faces, Eleanor with her thin smile of victory, Thomas with his self-righteous expression, Jennifer with her barely hidden curiosity, the children with their obvious discomfort, and Richard, my husband of 8 years, looking at me with an expression that was meant to be apologetic but was really just smug satisfaction. In that moment, I made a decision. I could have told them the truth right then, could have revealed that I was far from bankrupt, that I was in fact more successful than I had ever been. But where would be the satisfaction in that? No, I wanted them to believe they had won. I wanted them to feel secure in their cruelty, comfortable in their superiority. And then, when the moment was right, I would show them exactly how wrong they were. I reached for the envelope and pulled out the papers. They were professionally prepared, multiple pages of legal language that Richard's lawyer had obviously spent considerable time drafting. I scanned through them quickly, noting the terms. He was taking the house, the car, most of our joint assets. He was offering me a small settlement, barely enough to live on for a year, and he probably thought he was being generous. The table was silent as I read. Through the papers, I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for me to break down, to beg, to plead for another chance. Eleanor sipped her wine with evident satisfaction. Thomas cut into his turkey with exaggerated nonchalance. Richard watched me with barely concealed impatience, wanting this moment to be over so he could get on with whatever life he had planned without me. I pulled a pen from my purse, an expensive fountain pen that had, been a gift from a major client, and without a word, I signed each page where indicated. My signature was steady, clear, showing none of the emotion that churned inside me. When I finished, I slid the papers back across the table to Richard. His eyes widened slightly. I don't think he expected me to sign so easily, so calmly. He had probably prepared for tears, for arguments, for drama. Instead, I had given him nothing, just my signature and a neutral expression. "Well," I said quietly, my voice perfectly steady, "I suppose that's settled then. Now, shall we finish our dinner? It would be a shame to waste such excellent food." The table erupted into chaos. Eleanor started talking rapidly about how this was the best thing for everyone. Thomas made some comment about how I was being mature about the situation. Jennifer whispered something to her children. Richard just stared at me, confusion flickering across his face. This wasn't how he had expected this to go, but I ignored them all. I picked up my fork and knife and began cutting into my turkey with precise, deliberate movements. The meat was perfectly cooked, tender and flavorful. I took a bite and chewed slowly, savoring the taste, refusing to let them see how their words had affected me. The waiter approached, sensing the tension, but maintaining his professional demeanor. "Is everything satisfactory with your meals?" he asked, his eyes darting nervously between the divorce papers on the table and the strained faces around it. "Everything is perfect," I said, giving him a genuine smile. "In fact, I think we'll have another bottle of your best wine. This is a celebration after all." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Eleanor's smile faltered for just a moment. They had expected me to crumble, to make a scene, to give them the satisfaction of seeing me destroyed. Instead, I was ordering wine and eating my dinner, as if nothing significant had just happened. As the evening progressed, I watched them relax, watched them convince themselves that everything had gone according to plan. They talked about their holiday plans, about upcoming vacations, about business opportunities. Richard mentioned that he was looking at a new apartment downtown, something more suitable for a single professional. Eleanor talked about introducing him to the daughter of one of her country club friends, a young woman with family money and connections. I listened to it all with a calm expression, occasionally nodding or making brief comments when directly addressed. Inside, I was calculating, planning, waiting for the perfect moment. The moment that would come when the check arrived. The dinner continued for another hour. Dessert was served, an elaborate chocolate creation that under other circumstances I might have enjoyed. Coffee came after, rich and aromatic. The conversation flowed around me, washing over me like waves on a shore. I was present but separate, watching them all like an observer at a play rather than a participant in my own life. Finally, Richard gestured to the waiter. "We're ready for the check," he announced, his voice carrying that tone of masculine authority that he loved to project in public. The waiter nodded and disappeared, returning a few moments later with a leather folder containing the bill. He placed it on the table, equidistant between Richard and me, perhaps unsure of the proper protocol given the obvious tension that had permeated the evening. Richard reached for it immediately, making a show of opening it and reviewing the charges. His eyebrows rose slightly. The bill was substantial. This was, after all, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, and we had ordered appetizers, multiple entrees, several bottles of premium wine, and elaborate desserts for 7 people. He looked at me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or maybe just the realization that he would be expected to pay for this entire meal, including the woman he had just publicly humiliated with divorce papers. "I suppose we should split this," he said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. "Fair is fair, after all." Eleanor immediately jumped in. "Richard, don't be ridiculous. Catherine can hardly be expected to contribute given her situation. You'll take care of it, won't you, dear?" I watched this exchange with growing amusement. Richard clearly hadn't thought this through. He had been so focused on the dramatic gesture of serving me divorce papers that he hadn't considered the practical implications of doing so at an expensive restaurant. Before he could respond, I reached across the table and gently took the leather folder from his hand. "Don't worry," I said softly. "I'll take care of it." The table fell silent again. Richard opened, his mouth to protest, probably thinking about how this would look, the soon-to-be-divorced wife paying for the meal where she was served her papers. But something in my expression must have stopped him. I opened my purse, that expensive designer bag that I had bought for myself 6 months ago when the acquisition deal had closed. My fingers found what they were looking for immediately. I pulled out a card, sleek and black with minimal markings, and placed it on top of the bill. The waiter returned to collect the payment. He picked up the folder, opened it, and froze. His eyes widened as he looked at the card, then at me, then back at the card. His professional composure slipped for just a moment, and I saw genuine shock cross his face. "Ma'am," he said, his voice suddenly more respectful, almost reverent. "Is this really your card?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "Is there a problem?" "No, no problem at all. It's just, I've worked here for 5 years and I've only seen this card twice before. I'll process this right away." He hurried off, clutching the folder like it contained something precious. The table had gone completely silent. Everyone was staring at me now, confusion evident on their faces. Even the children had looked up from their phones, sensing that something significant had just happened. Richard leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What kind of card was that?" he asked, and I heard the first note of uncertainty in his voice. Before I could answer, the waiter returned, moving faster than he had all evening. Behind him came another man, older, distinguished, wearing a suit that marked him as management. The restaurant manager approached our table with a broad smile. "Mrs. Catherine Reynolds," he said, and then I noticed how he didn't use Richard's last name, how he used the business name I had registered with the card company. "It's an honor to have you dining with us this evening. If I had known you were here, I would have come to greet you personally much earlier. Please, allow me to offer our compliments to the chef. And of course, tonight's meal is on the house." Eleanor's wineglass slipped from her fingers, splashing red wine across the white tablecloth. Thomas's mouth hung open. Jennifer grabbed her husband's arm, her eyes wide. The children looked thoroughly confused. And Richard, my soon-to-be ex-husband Richard, looked like someone had just punched him in the stomach. "That's very kind," I said to the manager, "but not necessary. I'm happy to pay for our meal. It's been a very memorable evening." The manager insisted, but I was firm. I wanted to pay for this meal. I needed to pay for it. The symbolism was too perfect to pass up. Finally, he relented, processing the payment and returning my card with a respect that bordered on reverence. He even offered us complimentary after-dinner drinks, which I politely declined. As the manager walked away, I stood up from the table, smoothing down my dress with deliberate calm. 7 pairs of eyes watched my every movement. I picked up my Percy, adjusted my coat over my arm, and looked around the table one final time. "Thank you all for a lovely evening," I said, my voice pleasant and steady. "The divorce papers are signed, as requested. Richard, your lawyer can contact mine to finalize everything. I'll have my things out of the house by the end of the week." "Catherine, wait," Richard started, half rising from his chair, but I held up my hand to stop him. "There's nothing more to discuss. You wanted this. You got it. Congratulations." I turned to the waiter, who was hovering nearby, clearly trying to process what he had witnessed. I pulled out several bills from my purse and handed them to him. "For you," I said. "Thank you for your excellent service this evening." His eyes widened at the amount. It was more than generous. It was probably more than he made in a week. "Thank you." "Ma'am, thank you so much." I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of voices as the table erupted into chaos. Richard was saying my name, his voice rising in panic. Eleanor was demanding to know what just happened. Thomas was asking what kind of card that was. Jennifer was frantically searching something on her phone, but I didn't turn back. I walked through that restaurant with my head held high, past the other diners who had definitely noticed the scene at our table, past the host stand where staff members whispered to each other, and out into the cold December night. The air outside hit me like a physical shock after the warmth of the restaurant. Christmas lights twinkled up and down the street, reflecting off the light dusting of snow that had begun to fall. Couples walked by, arm in arm, carrying shopping bags and laughing. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear carol singers. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold air, letting it clear my head. Then I smiled. It was a real smile, the first genuine smile I had worn all evening, because I knew that back in that restaurant, reality was finally dawning on Richard and his family. They were finally beginning to understand that they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The card I had used wasn't just any card. It was an invitation-only card, available only to individuals with a certain level of wealth and status. The kind of card that comes with a personal concierge service, unlimited spending limits, and access to experiences that most people only dream about. The kind of card that you can't apply for, that you can only receive if you're specifically invited by the issuing company. Richard had thought I was bankrupt. He had thought I was desperate, helpless, that I needed him. He had planned this entire evening as a humiliation, a public display of his superiority and my downfall. He had served me divorce papers in front of his family, at Christmas dinner, in a fancy restaurant, expecting me to grovel, or weep, or beg. Instead, I had shown him and everyone at that table that I didn't just survive without him. I thrived. I had reached heights of success that he couldn't even imagine, and I had done it all while he was busy planning his exit strategy, while he was distancing himself from what he thought was a sinking ship. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out and saw a text message from Richard. "We need to talk. Please. Call me." I deleted it without responding. Then I opened my ride app and requested a car. While I waited, more messages came through. One from Richard's brother Thomas, one from Eleanor, even one from Jennifer, all wanting to talk, to explain, to understand what had just happened. I ignored them all, let them wonder, let them scramble, let them realize slowly, agonizingly, what they had lost and what they had underestimated. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver got out and opened the door for me with a respectful nod. I slid into the warm, leather interior and gave him my address. As we pulled away from the restaurant, I looked back once through the window. Richard stood on the sidewalk, his coat thrown on hastily, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. He was looking up and down the street frantically, searching for me. When he saw my car, he started to run toward it, waving his arms, shouting something I couldn't hear through the closed windows. I turned away and didn't look back again. That chapter of my life was closed. The papers were signed, the marriage was over, and tomorrow, the real work would begin. Because this wasn't just about divorce. This was about revelation. This was about showing Richard, and everyone who had underestimated me, exactly who Catherine Reynolds really was. And by the time I was done, they would never forget the mistake they made on this Christmas evening. The car glided through the snowy streets, and I leaned back against the seat, already planning my next moves. I thought about the house that Richard believed he was taking in the divorce, not knowing it was in a separate trust that I had established months ago. I thought about the assets he thought we shared, not knowing I had already protected everything that mattered. I thought about the business he believed had failed, not knowing it had just made me more money than he would earn in his entire lifetime. But most of all, I thought about that moment when the restaurant manager had recognized my card, when reality had begun to crack the facade of their smug superiority. And I smiled again, because that was just the beginning. Richard had handed me divorce papers on Christmas, thinking he was discarding someone broken and desperate. What he didn't realize was that he had just freed someone who was about to show him the true meaning of success. And the best part? He would have to watch it all unfold, powerless to change anything, living with the knowledge that he had thrown away the best thing that ever happened to him. The snow fell heavier now, coating the city in white. transforming everything into something clean and new. It felt appropriate somehow, like the universe itself was acknowledging this fresh start. As we drove through the illuminated streets, past families and couples and friends all celebrating together, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: freedom. And with that freedom came possibility. The possibility to build the life I truly wanted, surrounded by people who valued me for who I really was, not for what they thought they could get from me. The possibility to continue growing my business, without someone trying to diminish my achievements. The possibility to find real love someday, with someone who would celebrate my success rather than resent it. Richard had thought he was ending something tonight, but really, he had just set me free to begin something better, and by the time he realized that, it would be far too late. The car dropped me off in front of my temporary residence, a luxury apartment I had been renting for the past 3 months. Richard didn't know about this place. As far as he knew, I was still living in the house we had shared, the house he believed would soon be his. The irony made me smile as I rode the elevator to the 15th floor. The apartment was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city skyline. I had furnished it simply but elegantly, just enough to be comfortable during this transitional period. It was my sanctuary, my secret place where I could be myself without pretense or performance. I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of wine, standing by the window and watching the snow fall over the city lights. My phone continued to buzz with messages, but I ignored them all. Tomorrow would be soon enough to deal with the aftermath of tonight. For now, I just wanted to breathe, to process on, to remember how I had gotten here. It seemed like a lifetime ago, but it had only been 8 years since I met Richard. I was 30 years old, working as a mid-level consultant at a decent firm, making good money but not extraordinary. I was ambitious, driven, full of ideas about how to improve business systems and processes. I had dreams of starting my own company someday, but they seemed distant, almost impossible. Richard was 35 then, working in finance, charming and confident in that way that successful men often are. We met at a networking event, one of those evening mixers where professionals gather to make connections and trade business cards. He approached me at the bar, complimented my presentation earlier in the evening, and we talked for hours about business, goals, and ambitions. He seemed perfect. He was supportive of my career, interested in my ideas, encouraging about my dreams. When he proposed after a year of dating, I said yes without hesitation. I thought I had found a true partner, someone who would walk beside me through life as an equal. The first few years were good. We bought the house together, a beautiful colonial in a nice neighborhood. I continued working at the consulting firm while developing my business ideas on the side. Richard climbed the ladder at his financial company, earning promotions and bonuses. We attended dinner parties, went on vacations, built what looked from the outside like a perfect life. But things started to change when I launched my business. It was 5 years ago, and I had finally developed a software system that I believed could revolutionize how companies manage their internal processes. I had saved money, taken out a small loan, and started my company from our spare bedroom. Richard was supportive at first, at least superficially. He would ask about my progress, offer advice from his business experience. But I noticed small things, little comments that seemed innocent but carried an edge. When I celebrated landing my first major client, he said it was lucky timing. When I hired my first employee, he questioned whether I was growing too fast. When my revenue started to grow significantly, he suggested I should be careful not to neglect our marriage. The comments became more frequent as my success grew. He would mention how stressed I seemed, how much time I was spending on work, how I was changing. He started making jokes at dinner parties about how I was becoming a workaholic, about how he barely saw me anymore. The jokes always came with a smile, always seemed lighthearted to others, but I felt the sting behind them. 2 years ago, something shifted more dramatically. My company had grown to 15 employees, and our revenue had tripled. I was earning more than Richard for the first time in our marriage. That's when I noticed him becoming truly distant. He started working later, going on more business trips, being less available emotionally. I tried to talk to him about it, tried to understand what was wrong. He would insist everything was fine, that he was just busy with work, that I was being oversensitive. but I felt the coldness growing between us, felt the way he looked at me with something that might have been resentment. His mother Eleanor had never really liked me. She came from old money, from a world of country clubs and social hierarchies that I had never been part of. She had made it clear from the beginning that she thought Richard could have done better, could have married someone from their social circle, someone with the right family background and connections. When my business started succeeding, Eleanor's attitude became even more hostile. She would make pointed comments about how I was probably neglecting Richard, how career women often struggled to maintain proper homes, how ambition in a woman could be unattractive. Richard never defended me during these moments. He would just sit there, silent or worse, nod along as if he agreed. His brother Thomas was cut from the same cloth as Eleanor. He worked in commercial real estate, made decent money, and never let anyone forget it. His wife Jennifer was pleasant enough on the surface, but I always sensed she was evaluating me, comparing, finding me wanting in some way. Their children were teenagers, absorbed in their own worlds, probably, unaware of the subtle tensions in the adults around them. 6 months ago, I made a decision. I had been reading about business strategy, about how sometimes you need to test your assumptions, to verify what you think you know. I decided to test Richard. I wanted to know if he truly loved me, Catherine the person, or if he only valued Catherine the successful businesswoman who reflected well on him. So I planted false information. It wasn't difficult. I mentioned to Richard over breakfast one morning that one of my major clients was pulling out, that I was facing serious financial difficulties, that I might have to downsize or even close the business. I made sure to seem genuinely worried, to show vulnerability. His reaction told me everything I needed to know. Instead of offering support or encouragement, instead of asking how he could help, or suggesting we would get through it together, he became immediately distant. He started making comments about how he needed to protect his own financial interests, how he couldn't be responsible for my business decisions, how maybe I had expanded too aggressively. Over the following weeks, I continued the charade, mentioning more financial troubles, more client problems, more stress about money, and with each mention, Richard pulled further away. He started staying out later, being less communicative, treating me more like a burden than a partner. What Richard didn't know was that my business was actually thriving beyond my wildest expectations. The supposed client who had pulled out was fictional. The financial troubles were imaginary. In reality, I had been in negotiations with a major corporation that wanted to acquire my proprietary software system. The deal was worth more money than I had ever dreamed of making. I had worked with lawyers and financial advisors to structure everything carefully. The acquisition was completed 4 months ago, but I kept it completely confidential. The money went into accounts that Richard knew nothing about. I established trusts, protected my assets, made sure that everything I had built would remain mine no matter what happened in my marriage. I also quietly began removing my name from joint accounts, transferring ownership of assets, preparing for what I increasingly suspected was coming. The house, which Richard believed we owned together, had actually been purchased primarily with my business earnings. I had documentation proving this, along with a separate trust that protected it. The car he drove had been a gift from me, purchased entirely with my money. Most of our furniture, our artwork, our possessions had been bought with my earnings, but I let him believe we were equal partners in everything. I let him believe that in a divorce, he would get half. I wanted to see what he would do, how low he would go, what his true character really was. And tonight, I had gotten my answer. I finished my wine and set the glass down, looking at my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me looked composed, elegant, successful. She bore little resemblance to the uncertain consultant who had married Richard 8 years ago. I had grown, evolved, become someone stronger and more capable than I ever imagined possible. My phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Richard calling again. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, I listened to the message. "Catherine, please, we need to talk. I don't understand what happened tonight. That card, the way the manager treated you. I'm confused. Call me back. We can work this out. Maybe the papers were premature. Just call me." The desperation in his voice was evident. The confidence from earlier in the evening had evaporated, replaced by panic and confusion. He was beginning to realize that something was very wrong with his understanding of our situation. Another message came through. This one from Eleanor. "Catherine, dear, I think there may have, been some misunderstanding this evening. Perhaps we should all sit down and discuss things calmly. Family is important. I'm sure we can resolve whatever issues exist. Call me." The sudden change in her tone was almost comical. This morning, she had probably been celebrating the idea of me being removed from the family. Now, seeing that card, witnessing the restaurant manager's deference, she was scrambling to understand what she had missed. Thomas sent a text message. "Hey, Catherine, maybe Richard acted too hastily. You know how he gets sometimes. Let's all take a breath and talk about this. No need for anything rash." Even Jennifer reached out. "Catherine, I'm sure this is all very overwhelming. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. We're family, after all." I read through all the messages with growing amusement. Less than 3 hours ago, they had been complicit in my public humiliation. They had sat there while Richard handed me divorce papers, had made comments about my supposed financial struggles, had looked at me with pity and superiority. Now they were all scrambling, trying to backtrack, trying to figure out what had just happened. But the message that interested me most came from an unexpected source. It was from Marcus Webb, Richard's boss at the financial firm where he worked. Marcus and I had met several times at company events, and he had always struck me as sharp and observant. "Catherine, I heard about tonight's events through the professional grapevine. This city's business community is smaller than people think. I wanted to reach out personally to congratulate you on your recent acquisition deal. It's an impressive achievement. I also wanted to let you know that if you need any financial advice during your transition, my door is always open. Best regards, Marcus." I stared at that message for a long moment, so the news was already spreading. The business community would know by tomorrow that Richard had divorced his wife, just as she had closed one of the biggest acquisition deals of the year. The optics were terrible for him, and Marcus was smart enough to see it. I texted back a brief thank you to Marcus, then turned off my phone entirely. I needed sleep, needed to think clearly about my next steps. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own revelations. But before I went to bed, I allowed myself one moment of satisfaction. I walked to my home office, a small room I had set up with a desk and filing cabinets. I pulled out a folder marked "Personal Legal Documents" and opened it. Inside were copies of everything. The acquisition agreement showing the full value of the deal, the bank statements showing my current net worth, the trust documents protecting my assets, the proof of my sole ownership of the house, the documentation of every major purchase I had made with my own earnings. Everything I would need to ensure that Richard got exactly what he deserved in the divorce, which was virtually nothing. I had also documented his affair. Yes, there was an affair. I had hired a private investigator 2 months ago, when my suspicions grew too strong to ignore. The investigator had provided photographs, time-stamped evidence, witness statements. Richard had been seeing someone from his office, a younger woman who clearly didn't know he was still married. The affair would be additional leverage if he tried to challenge the divorce or make unreasonable demands. I closed the folder and put it back in the filing cabinet, locking it carefully. Everything was in place. Everything was ready. Richard had thought he was controlling this situation, thought he was the one making the decisions. He had no idea how thoroughly I had prepared, how completely I had protected myself. As I got ready for bed, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It hadn't been easy building my business. There had been long nights, difficult decisions, moments of doubt and fear, but I had persevered, had believed in my vision, had worked harder than I ever thought possible, and through it all, I had foolishly believed that Richard was proud of me, that he supported my success, that he loved me for who I was. Instead, he had been waiting for me to fail, had been looking for an excuse to leave, had seen my supposed bankruptcy as his opportunity to escape without looking like the villain. Well, he had gotten his divorce. He had gotten exactly what he asked for, but he had also revealed his true nature to everyone who mattered, and now he would have to live with the consequences of his choices. I climbed into bed, pulled the soft covers around me, and closed my eyes. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. Inside, I felt a strange sense of peace. Yes, my marriage was over. Yes, I would have to rebuild my personal life. But I was free, truly free, for the first time in years. And tomorrow, when Richard and his family fully understood what they had lost, when the reality of their mistake became undeniable, I would be ready, not with anger or revenge, but with dignity and strength. I would show them that underestimating Catherine Reynolds was the biggest mistake they would ever make. Sleep came easily that night, easier than it had in months. I dreamed of possibilities, of new beginnings, of a future where I could be completely myself without apology or compromise. When I woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the windows, reflecting off the fresh snow and filling the apartment with bright, clean light. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the city come to life below. It was the day after Christmas, and the streets were quieter than usual. But there was still movement, still life, still possibility. My phone, which I had turned back on, immediately exploded with notifications. Dozens of missed calls, text messages, even emails. Richard had tried calling 15 times during the night. Eleanor had left multiple voicemails. Thomas, Jennifer, even some of Richard's work colleagues had reached out. But there was one message that caught my attention immediately. It was from my lawyer, Patricia Morrison, a brilliant attorney who specialized in high-net-worth divorces. I had retained her 3 months ago, preparing for what I suspected was coming. "Catherine, I heard about last night. Congratulations on handling it with such grace. I have the papers Richard filed, and they're exactly as we anticipated. He's asking for the house, half of all marital assets, and a modest settlement for you. He clearly has no idea about your actual financial situation. We can proceed exactly as planned. The house is protected in your trust, and we have documentation proving you purchased it primarily with your business earnings. His claims to your business assets are also groundless, given the prenuptial protections we established. I'll file our response papers today. By the time he understands what's happening, it will be too late for him to change course. Call me when you're ready to discuss next steps." I smiled, sipping my coffee. Patricia was exactly the kind of lawyer I needed. Sharp, strategic, and completely on top of every detail. She had helped me structure everything perfectly, had made sure that Richard's attempt to take advantage of my supposed poverty would backfire spectacularly. I decided it was time to return one call. I dialed Richard's number, and he answered on the first ring. "Catherine, thank God. Listen, about last night. I think we need to talk. There are things I don't understand." His voice was frantic, desperate. The confident man from the restaurant was gone, replaced by someone scrambling to understand a situation that had spiraled beyond his control. "There's nothing to discuss, Richard. You wanted a divorce. I signed the papers. It's done. But that card, Catherine, how did you have that card? What's going on? You told me the business was struggling, that you were facing bankruptcy." I let the silence stretch for a moment, enjoying his confusion. "I never said I was facing bankruptcy, Richard. I said I was having some client challenges. You drew your own conclusions from that, but you let me believe you were in trouble. You let me think you needed help. I wanted to see what you would do, how you would react, and you showed me exactly who you are. When you thought I was succeeding, you resented me. When you thought I was failing, you abandoned me. Either way, you proved that you never actually loved me. You loved what I could do for you, how I made you look, what I could provide, but you never loved Catherine. That's not true. I love you. I made a mistake. The papers, last night, it was all a terrible mistake. We can tear them up, start over, go to counseling. The papers are signed. Richard, both of us signed them. It's over. But Catherine, we can work this out. I know I've been distant. I know I haven't been supportive enough. But we can fix this. We can rebuild. Why would I want to rebuild something that was never real in the first place? You showed me your true colors, Richard. You don't get to take that back just because you now realize I'm not the failure you thought I was." He was breathing heavily now, panic clear in every word. "Your business, Catherine. What happened with your business? That card you used, only certain people have access to cards like that. People with significant wealth. How is that possible if your business was struggling? My business was never struggling, Richard. In fact, my business just concluded the most successful deal of my career. But you don't get to know the details. That's not your concern anymore. You wanted out of this marriage. Congratulations. You got your wish. I didn't know. If I had known, I never would have filed those papers. We can fix this. And there it was. The truth laid bare. He didn't want me back because he realized he loved me. He wanted me back because he realized I had money. His motivations were exactly as shallow as I had suspected. Goodbye, Richard. My lawyer will be in touch about finalizing everything. Catherine, wait, please. I ended the call and immediately blocked his number. Then I blocked Eleanor's number, Thomas's number, Jennifer's number. I didn't need to hear their explanations or excuses. They had shown me who they were, and I believed them. My phone rang again almost immediately. It was Patricia, my lawyer. Catherine, did you just speak with Richard? Yes, he's panicking, trying to undo everything. But the papers are signed. Perfect. His panic will work in our favor. He's going to try to challenge the divorce, claim it was signed under duress or confusion. But we have witnesses to the restaurant scene. We have evidence that he planned the entire event. We have documentation of his affair. He doesn't have a leg to stand. On Martin, I'm filing our response today, and I'm including all the documentation of your protected assets, your separate property, and the prenuptial agreement clauses he seems to have forgotten about. There was a prenuptial agreement? I was confused. I didn't remember signing one. You had it drafted right before the wedding, remember? Richard convinced you it wasn't necessary, that it showed a lack of trust. But you insisted on at least basic protections for any business you might start in the future. He signed it because he thought you'd never actually build a successful business. That agreement protects everything you've created. Catherine, your company, your assets, your earnings, all of it is separate property. He's entitled to nothing. The memory came flooding back. I had insisted on that agreement after my father advised me to protect myself. Richard had been hurt, had said it meant I didn't trust him, had made me feel guilty about it. But I had held firm on that one point, and now that decision was saving me. So what happens next? He'll receive our response papers this afternoon. When he sees what he's actually entitled to in this divorce, which is essentially nothing, he's going to lose his mind. He thought he was taking half of everything. Instead, he gets whatever he came into the marriage with, which wasn't much, and half of the one joint savings account you maintained, which has about $5,000 in it. The house is yours, the car is yours, all your business assets are yours. He leaves this marriage with almost nothing. And he can't fight it? He can try, but he won't win. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. The documentation of your separate assets is thorough, and the evidence of his affair will discourage him from making too much noise. If he pushes too hard, we'll make the affair public, which won't look good for him professionally. Trust me, Catherine. You're protected. He played himself, and now he has to face the consequences. We talked for another 20 minutes about logistics, timelines, and next steps. By the time I hung up, I felt even more confident. Everything was proceeding exactly as it should. I spent the rest of the day organizing my apartment, responding to business emails, and planning for the week ahead. I had meetings scheduled with investors, follow-up discussions about the acquisition, and strategic planning sessions for my company's next phase. My business life was busier than ever, and I was grateful for the distraction. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Catherine Reynolds? Yes. Who is this? My name is Sarah Mitchell. I work with Richard at the financial firm. I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet? I hesitated. This could be a trap. Some scheme that Richard had cooked up. What is this about? It's about Richard's affair. I'm the woman he's been seeing. But there are things you need to know. Things I need to tell you. Please, this is important. I agreed to meet Sarah at a quiet coffee shop the next morning, a place far from Richard's usual haunts. When I arrived, I spotted her immediately. She was younger than me, maybe 28, with dark hair and nervous eyes that darted around the room constantly. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. Her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had clearly gone cold. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't," I admitted. "But you said this was important." Sarah took a deep breath. seeming to gather her courage. "I need to tell you the truth about Richard and me. But first, you need to know that I had no idea he was married. He told me he was divorced, that it had been finalized months ago. He showed me papers, documents that looked official. I believed him completely. I studied her face carefully, looking for signs of deception, but all I saw was genuine distress." "When did you find out the truth?" 2 days ago. Christmas Day. I saw the news online about what happened at the restaurant. Someone posted about it on social media. Some business blog picked it up. They were calling it the most dramatic Christmas dinner in the city's recent history. That's when I realized Richard had lied to me about everything. She pulled out her phone and showed me the post. Sure enough, there was a brief article with a blurry photo someone had taken at the restaurant. The headline read, "Holiday Drama. Local finance executive serves divorce papers at Christmas dinner. Wife's response shocks everyone." "I confronted him immediately," Sarah continued, her voice shaking. "He tried to lie at first, said the article was wrong, that you were his ex-wife causing problems. But I pushed, and eventually the truth came out. He was still married. The divorce had just happened that night. Everything he told me was a lie." "How long were you seeing him?" 3 months. He pursued me aggressively at work, always finding reasons to talk to me, to work on projects together. He seemed charming, successful, available. When he asked me out, I said yes. We kept it quiet because of the workplace relationship rules. But he said once his divorce was finalized, we could be public about everything. I felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for her. She was a victim in this too, manipulated by Richard's lies, just as I had been manipulated by his false affection. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because there's more you need to know. Richard has been planning this for months. Catherine, it wasn't just about leaving you. He had a whole strategy." My attention sharpened. "What kind of strategy?" Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice even though we were alone in the corner of the coffee shop. "About 2 months ago, Richard started talking about money. He said his ex-wife, meaning you, had been successful but had fallen on hard times. He said when the divorce was finalized, he would get the house. Significant assets, a good settlement. He was already planning how he would use that money to invest in new opportunities. He thought I was broke," I said quietly. "He thought the divorce would leave him with everything and me with nothing." "Exactly. But that's not all. He was bragging to me about how smart he was, how he had timed everything perfectly. He said he had encouraged you to take risks with your business, to expand aggressively, hoping you would overextend and fail. When he thought you were failing, that's when he decided to file for divorce. He thought he was getting out at the perfect time, taking the assets before they could be depleted by your business troubles. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. Richard hadn't just abandoned me when he thought I was struggling. He had actively tried to make me fail, had encouraged decisions he hoped would lead to my downfall. Did he say anything else? He talked about his mother, too, Eleanor. He said she had been pushing him to leave you for years, that she never thought you were good enough for their family. She had even threatened to cut him out of her will if he stayed with you. The divorce wasn't just about money or about me. It was about Richard finally doing what his mother wanted. So Eleanor had been pulling strings all along, poisoning my marriage from the inside. The revelation didn't surprise me, but it clarified many things. Richard's growing coldness, his increasing criticism, his resentment of my success. All of it had been influenced by his mother's constant disapproval. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, and her voice dropped even lower. "Yesterday, after Richard found out about your card at the restaurant, he called me in a panic. He was ranting about how you had tricked him, how you had hidden your true financial situation. He said he needed to fix this, needed to get you back, needed to stop the divorce from going through. He tried calling me multiple times. I blocked his number. As he asked me to help him, he wanted me to call you, to somehow convince you to give him another chance. He said if we worked together, we could figure out a way to undo everything. When I refused, when I told him I wanted nothing to do with his schemes, he became angry. He said I was ungrateful, that he had taken risks being with me, that I owed him." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "That's when I realized what kind of man he really is. He doesn't love anyone except himself. He used me just like he used you, and he would keep using people as long as they served his purposes." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Thank you for telling me all of this. I know it couldn't have been easy. I felt like I needed to warn you. Richard is desperate now, and desperate people do dangerous things. He's already talking about challenging the divorce, claiming you deceived him, trying to find any angle to get what he thinks he deserves. You need to be careful. My lawyer is handling everything. Richard signed the papers voluntarily in front of multiple witnesses. He doesn't have grounds to challenge anything. I hope you're right. But Catherine, there's something else you should know about Richard and his family. They're not just greedy. They're vindictive. Eleanor especially. If she thinks you've made her son look foolish, she'll try to retaliate somehow. Be careful. We talked for another 30 minutes. Sarah told me more details about Richard's behavior during their relationship, the red flags she had missed, the lies she had believed. By the time we parted ways, I had a much clearer picture of the man I had been married to for 8 years. Richard wasn't just selfish or opportunistic. He was calculating and cruel, willing to sabotage someone he claimed to love in order to serve his own interests. And his family, particularly Eleanor, had encouraged and enabled this behavior for years. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt my phone buzzing constantly. More messages from Richard, now coming from different numbers since I had blocked his main one. Messages from Eleanor, increasingly demanding and less polite. Even messages from some of Richard's work colleagues, probably sent at his request, trying to reach me. But one message stood out. It was from Marcus Webb, Richard's boss. Catherine, need to speak with you urgently about Richard's employment situation. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I called him immediately. Marcus answered on the second ring. Catherine, thank you for calling back. I'm afraid I have some uncomfortable news to share with you about Richard's situation at our firm. What's happened? Well, after the events of Christmas evening became known, and after certain other facts about Richard's behavior came to light, we've had to conduct an internal investigation. It appears Richard has been involved in some questionable activities, including an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate employee, expense report irregularities, and some concerning client interactions. Sarah Mitchell, I guessed. Yes. She came forward yesterday with information about their relationship and Richard's misrepresentations to her. While workplace relationships aren't forbidden, lying to colleagues about marital status and potentially pressuring subordinates certainly is. We've placed Richard on administrative leave while we complete our investigation. I see. There's more. We've also discovered that Richard may have been using his position to gain advantages in ways that violate our ethics policies. Nothing illegal, necessarily, but certainly unethical. Combined with the publicity from the restaurant incident, which has frankly embarrassed the firm, we're seriously considering termination. I should have felt satisfaction at this news. Instead, I just felt tired. Marcus, I appreciate you telling me this, but Richard's employment situation isn't really my concern anymore. I understand, but I wanted you to know because Richard has been telling people at the firm that you're the one who sabotaged him, that you've been spreading lies about him, that you're trying to ruin his career out of revenge for the divorce. I wanted to make sure you knew the truth. This is entirely the consequence of Richard's own actions, not anything you've done. Thank you for clarifying that. There's one more thing. If Richard loses his position here, and it's looking increasingly likely that he will, his financial situation is going to become quite difficult. He's been living beyond his means for years, spending money he doesn't really have, maintaining appearances. Without this job, without the assets he thought he would get from the divorce, he's going to be in serious trouble. I'm telling you this not to upset you, but so you're prepared. Desperate people sometimes do unpredictable things. The second warning in one morning, both Sarah and Marcus were concerned about what Richard might do when he fully realized the extent of his losses. I appreciate the warning. I'll be careful. After hanging up with Marcus, I called Patricia, my lawyer, and told her everything I had learned. She listened carefully, taking notes, asking occasional questions. This is all very useful information, she said when I finished. Richard's affair, his premeditation in timing the divorce, his attempts to sabotage your business, all of it strengthens our position. If he tries to challenge anything, we'll have plenty of ammunition to discourage him. And if he becomes threatening in any way, we can get a restraining order immediately. Do you think it will come to that? Hard to say. Some people accept defeat gracefully. Others fight until the bitter end, even when they know they can't win. Richard strikes me as someone who doesn't handle losing very well. That evening, I decided to stop hiding in my apartment. I had done nothing wrong. I had built a successful business through hard work and intelligence. I had protected my assets legally and ethically. I had signed divorce papers that Richard himself had prepared and served to me. I had nothing to be ashamed of, and no reason to hide. I dressed carefully in an elegant black outfit and went to a business dinner I had been invited to weeks ago. It was a networking event for successful entrepreneurs, the kind of gathering I had attended many times before. But this time felt different. This time, I was walking in as a newly single woman, as someone who had just closed a major acquisition deal, as someone whose personal drama had become semi-public knowledge. The moment I walked into the venue, I could feel the attention shift toward me. Conversations paused. People turned to look. Some faces showed sympathy. Others showed curiosity. A few showed what might have been respect or admiration. A woman I had met briefly at a previous event approached me immediately. Her name was Diana, and she ran a successful marketing firm. "Catherine, I'm so glad you came tonight. I heard about what happened at Christmas dinner. That took remarkable courage and grace." "Thank you," I said, surprised by her directness. I wasn't sure if I should come tonight, but I decided I wasn't going to let personal matters stop me from living my life. "Good for you, and congratulations on your acquisition deal. That's incredible achievement. You should be celebrating, not hiding." Other people began approaching, offering congratulations, sharing their own stories of difficult divorces or business successes. The evening became less about my personal drama and more about connections, opportunities, and the future. I found myself relaxing, enjoying the conversations, remembering why I loved this work in the first place. Near the end of the evening, I was talking with a group of investors when I noticed a commotion near the entrance. Security was speaking firmly with someone, blocking their entry. My heart sank as I recognized the voice. It was Richard, drunk and belligerent, demanding to be let in, insisting he needed to speak with his wife. The security guards were professional, but firm, explaining that this was a private event, and he wasn't on the guest list. Diana touched my arm gently. "Is that him?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Do you want us to call the police?" "No, I'll handle it." I walked toward the entrance, my heart pounding but my expression calm. Richard saw me approaching, and his face twisted with emotion, anger and desperation, and something that might have been genuine pain. "Catherine, finally, these people won't let me in. Tell them I'm your husband. Tell them to let me talk to you. You're not my husband anymore, Richard. We signed divorce papers. You served them to me, remember? That was a mistake. I didn't understand the situation. You tricked me. I didn't trick you. You assumed I was failing because that's what you wanted to believe. You wanted an excuse to leave without looking like the villain. Well, you got your divorce. Now you need to accept it and move on. Move on? How can I move on when you've ruined everything? I lost my job because of you. People are talking about me, judging me, all because you wanted revenge. You lost your job because of your own choices, Richard. The affair, the ethics, violations, the lies. That's all on you, not me. He tried to push past the security guards, but they held him back firmly. You owe me, Catherine. I gave you 8 years of my life. I supported you when you started your business. You resented me when I succeeded and abandoned me when you thought I failed. That's not support, Richard. That's opportunism. Now please leave before you embarrass yourself further. His face turned red with rage. This isn't over. You haven't heard the last from me. The security guards escorted him out, and I stood there for a moment, trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Diana appeared beside me with a glass of water. Are you okay? Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry you all had to witness that. Don't apologize. Everyone here saw what kind of man he is. If anything, this just confirmed that you made the right decision. Looked around the room and saw faces filled with sympathy and support. These were my colleagues, my professional community, people who understood business and success and the challenges that came with both. They weren't judging me for my failed marriage. If anything, they were impressed by how I had handled an impossible situation. The rest of the evening passed without incident. I made valuable connections, discussed potential collaborations, and reminded myself that my life was so much bigger than my relationship with Richard. I had built something meaningful, something that would last long after this painful chapter had ended. When I finally returned to my apartment late that night, I found one final message waiting for me. It was from Patricia, my lawyer, and it was brief but significant. Richard's lawyer just contacted me. They want to negotiate a settlement. Richard is willing to accept the terms as outlined in the prenuptial agreement if we agree not to pursue any claims related to his affair or his attempts to sabotage your business. In other words, he's surrendering completely. He knows he can't win. Call me in the morning to discuss. I read the message 3 times, letting the words sink in. It was over. Richard had finally realized that he couldn't fight this, couldn't manipulate his way out of the consequences of his actions. He was surrendering, accepting defeat, acknowledging that he had underestimated me completely. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt sad. Sad for the years wasted, for the trust betrayed, for the love that had never really existed in the first place. But beneath the sadness was something else, something stronger and more enduring. Relief, freedom, and the absolute certainty that whatever came next would be better than what I was leaving behind. Tomorrow, I would call Patricia and we would finalize everything. Tomorrow, I would officially close this chapter of my life. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply breathe, to appreciate the silence and peace of my apartment, to acknowledge how far I had come and how much further I was ready to go. The morning sunlight filtered through my apartment windows as I sat at my desk, reviewing the settlement documents Patricia had sent over. Everything was exactly as we had planned. Richard would leave the marriage with almost nothing, accepting the terms without challenge. He was surrendering completely, and all I had to do was sign one final set of papers. But something felt incomplete. Richard had caused so much pain, had manipulated and betrayed me so thoroughly, yet he was, walking away relatively unscathed. Yes, he had lost his job and his marriage, but he hadn't truly faced the full consequences of his actions. He hadn't been forced to confront what he had done in any meaningful way. I called Patricia and told her to hold off on finalizing the settlement for 24 hours. I had one more thing I needed to do. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove to the house Richard and I had shared, the beautiful colonial that he had believed would be his after the divorce, the house that was actually mine, protected in a trust, purchased primarily with my earnings. I had my keys, of course, though I hadn't been back since moving into the apartment 3 months ago. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Richard's car parked haphazardly, one wheel on the lawn. The curtains were drawn, and the whole place had an air of neglect that made my heart sink. I let myself in quietly. The house was a mess. Empty bottles littered the coffee table. Dirty dishes filled the sink. Mail and papers were scattered everywhere. Richard had clearly been living here alone in a downward spiral since Christmas evening. I found him in the living room, unshaven and wearing the same clothes he had probably slept in. He was staring at his laptop screen with bloodshot eyes, not noticing my entrance at first. "Hello, Richard," I said quietly. He jumped, spinning around with shock written across his face. "Catherine, what are you doing here? This is my house. I can be here whenever I want. We need to talk." He stood up unsteadily, and I could smell alcohol on his breath even from several feet away. "If you're here to gloat, just get it over with. I've already agreed to your terms. I'm giving you everything. What more do you want? I want you to understand something. I want you to really see what you did and why it was wrong." He laughed bitterly. "I know what I did. I underestimated you. I thought you were failing when you were actually succeeding. I get it. You were smarter than me. Congratulations. That's not what this is about, Richard. This isn't about who was smarter or who won some game. This is about the fact that you never actually loved me. You loved what I could do for you, how I made you look, what I represented, but you never loved Catherine." He slumped back onto the couch, running his hands through his greasy hair. "That's not true. I did love you. I couldn't handle how much you changed. You weren't the woman I married anymore. I grew, Richard. I built something meaningful. I achieved success through hard work, and instead of being proud of me, instead of supporting me, you resented me. Every achievement felt like a threat to you. Because it was. You started making more money than me. People started respecting you more than me. I became Catherine's husband instead of you being Richard's wife. Do you know how that felt? So your ego was more important than our marriage. Your need to feel superior was more important than celebrating my success. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. My mother always said you would overshadow me eventually. She said women like you, ambitious women, they always end up destroying their marriages. I guess she was right. Your mother poisoned your mind against me from the beginning. Sarah told me Eleanor threatened to cut you out of her will if you stayed married to me. Is that true? Richard's silence was answer enough. You let your mother control your marriage. Richard, you let her convince you that my success was somehow your failure. And when you thought I was struggling, when you believed I was facing bankruptcy, you saw it as your opportunity to escape. You actually tried to sabotage my business, encouraging me to take risks you hoped would lead to my downfall. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. You admitted it to Sarah. You bragged about how clever you were, timing the divorce for when you thought you could take the assets before they were depleted by my business troubles. You planned this, Richard. This wasn't some impulsive decision. You calculated everything. He was crying now, tears streaming down his unshaven face. I made mistakes. I know that. But I'm paying for them now, aren't I? I lost everything. My job, my marriage, my reputation. What more do you want from me? I sat down in the chair across from him, maintaining distance but forcing him to look at me. I want you to truly understand what you destroyed. Not just our marriage, but the possibility of something real. I loved you, Richard. When I married you 8 years ago, I genuinely loved you. I believed we were partners, that we would build a life together, support each other through successes and failures. I loved you too. No, you didn't. You loved the version of me that made you feel important. When I started succeeding beyond you, when I started becoming someone independent and powerful, you couldn't handle it. Real love celebrates the other person's growth. Real love doesn't require the other person to stay small so you can feel big. Richard wiped his eyes roughly. What do you want me to say, Catherine? That I was a terrible husband? That I was selfish and insecure? Fine. I admit it. Does that make you feel better? It's not about making me feel better. It's about you recognizing what you did, so you don't do it to someone else. Sarah deserved better than your lies. I deserved better than your manipulation. Whatever woman comes into your life next deserves to know the real you, not the performance you put on until you can't maintain it anymore. He stood up, abruptly, pacing the messy room like a caged animal. You think you're so perfect, don't you? You think you never did anything wrong in this marriage? I'm sure I made mistakes, but I never lied to you about who I was. I never tried to sabotage your career. I never abandoned you when you needed support. Everything I built honestly. Can you say the same? He stopped pacing, his shoulders sagging with defeat. No, I can't. I played games, made calculations, tried to position myself advantageously, and it all blew up in my face. Is that what you wanted to hear? I wanted you to be honest with yourself about who you really are. Not for me, Richard. For you. Because if you don't face this honestly, if you don't truly examine your behavior and choices, you'll just repeat the same patterns with the next person. We sat in silence for several minutes. Richard eventually collapsed back onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, stripped of its usual defensiveness. I was jealous. From the moment your business started succeeding, I was jealous. I told myself I was proud of you, that I supported you, but inside I was seething. Every client you landed, every employee you hired, every achievement you celebrated felt like a reminder that you were surpassing me, and I hated myself for feeling that way, which made me hate you for making me feel it. I never asked you to compete with me. We could have celebrated both our successes. I know, but I couldn't separate your success from my own worth. When you succeeded, I felt like I was failing. It was irrational, but I couldn't stop feeling it. And then my mother kept reinforcing those feelings, kept telling me that you were changing, that you were becoming someone who would leave me behind. So you decided to leave me first. Yes, when you mentioned business troubles, when I thought you were finally failing, it felt like an opportunity, a chance to get out before things got worse, to take what I could and start over. It was cowardly and cruel, but in that moment, It felt like survival. I studied his face carefully. For the first time since Christmas evening, I saw something resembling genuine remorse. Not self-pity or anger at being caught, but actual understanding of the harm he had caused. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Do you want me to fight for us? Try to fix this?" "No, Richard. It's too late for that. The divorce is happening, and it should happen. We've both seen who we really are in this crisis, and we're not compatible. But I hope you learn from this. I hope you get help dealing with your insecurities and your mother's influence. I hope you become honest with yourself about what you want and what you're capable of being." He nodded slowly, looking older than his years. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just sorry I got caught or sorry things didn't work out how I planned. I'm sorry for hurting you. You deserved better than what I gave you." I stood up, preparing to leave. "Thank you for saying that. I hope you mean it. Catherine, one more thing. That card you used at the restaurant. How successful is your business, really?" I almost didn't answer, but something made me decide to tell him the truth. The acquisition deal was worth $32 million. My current net worth is approximately $45 million. I'm one of the most successful entrepreneurs in this city. "Richard, and you threw me away because you thought I was bankrupt." His face went pale. I could see him doing the calculations, understanding the full magnitude of what he had lost. Not just the money, though that was significant, but the partnership with someone who had achieved so much. "I'm an idiot," he whispered. "You were blinded by your insecurities and your mother's poison. But maybe this will teach you something valuable. Maybe next time, you'll choose growth over fear." I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. "I'll have movers come get the few things I left here. The house is mine, Richard, but I'm giving you 30 days to find somewhere else to live. That's more than generous given the circumstances, but I don't want to be cruel. Use that time to get yourself together." "Thank you," he said, and he actually sounded grateful. As I drove away from that house for the last time, I felt lighter than I had in months. The conversation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. Richard had finally been forced to confront his actions honestly, without defenses or excuses. Whether he would actually learn from this or simply repeat the same patterns remained to be seen, but at least I had given him the truth. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment building. It was Patricia. "Catherine, Eleanor Morrison just called my office. She wants to meet with you. She says she has something important to discuss. Something that might interest you regarding the family assets and Richard's future." I felt a cold clarity settle over me. Eleanor, the puppet master behind so much of Richard's behavior, finally making her move. "Set up the meeting, tomorrow afternoon, but make sure it's in your office, not anywhere she chooses. And Patricia, I want you there for every second of it." "Done. Catherine, be careful. Eleanor Morrison is known for being manipulative and strategic. Whatever she's planning, it won't be straightforward." "I know, but I'm ready for her. I've been ready for a long time." That evening, instead of anxiety or fear, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. The final confrontation was coming, the last piece of this painful puzzle. Eleanor had manipulated my marriage from the shadows, had poisoned Richard against me, had pushed him toward this divorce. Now she was coming out into the open, and I would finally get to face her directly. Whatever she had planned, whatever game she thought she was playing, I would be ready, because I had learned something important through all of this. The people who try to make you feel small, who resent your success, who manipulate and scheme, they only have power if you let them. And I was done letting anyone have power over my life. Tomorrow, I would face Eleanor. And then, finally, this chapter would truly close. Patricia's office was located on the 23rd floor of a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel with panoramic views of the city. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit that conveyed both professionalism and power. Patricia greeted me at the reception area, her expression serious but confident. "Eleanor just confirmed she's on her way up. Are you ready for this?" "More than ready," I replied, settling into one of the leather chairs in the conference room. "Let's see what she has to say." Eleanor Morrison swept into the office exactly on time, dressed in an expensive cream suit with pearls at her throat. She carried herself with the imperious confidence of someone who had never been told no, who had always gotten her way through a combination of money, social position, and strategic manipulation. Her eyes swept over me with barely concealed disdain before she took the seat across the conference table. "Catherine," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know recent events have been difficult for everyone involved. Let's skip the pleasantries, Eleanor. Why are you here?" Her smile tightened, direct as always. "Very well. I'm here to discuss a resolution that would benefit everyone, particularly Richard. As you know, my son has lost his employment and is facing significant financial difficulties. The divorce settlement leaves him with virtually nothing, which I'm sure gives you great satisfaction. The divorce settlement is based on a prenuptial agreement that Richard signed voluntarily. He's getting exactly what he's legally entitled to, which is what he brought into the marriage. Nothing more, nothing less." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "Legal technicalities. The reality is that Richard made a mistake, a serious mistake, but he's still my son. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer to help smooth over this unfortunate situation." I glanced at Patricia, who was taking notes with a neutral expression. "What kind of offer?" "I'm willing to pay you $2 million if you agree to renegotiate the divorce settlement, give Richard the house, a reasonable portion of the assets, and sign a non-disclosure agreement stating you won't discuss the circumstances of your divorce publicly. In exchange, you walk away with $2 million in cash, immediate and untraceable. Everyone wins." The audacity of it took my breath away. She was trying to buy my silence, to rewrite history so Richard wouldn't look like the villain he actually was. More than that, she was trying to do it with money that was insignificant compared to what I had earned on my own. "You want me to give Richard assets he has no legal claim to, lie about what happened, and accept $2 million for the privilege. I prefer to think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement. $2 million is a substantial sum of money, Catherine. More money than you probably ever imagined having when you married Richard. You could take it, start fresh somewhere else, leave all of this unpleasantness behind." I leaned back in my chair, studying her carefully. Eleanor had no idea who she was dealing with. She was still operating under the assumption that I was someone who could be bought, someone who would be impressed by money, someone who needed her help. "Eleanor, let me tell you something about that $2 million you're offering. Last month, I donated $3 million to a scholarship fund for young women entrepreneurs. It was less than 10% of my liquid assets, and I didn't think twice about it. So when you offer me $2 million as if it's some life-changing amount, all you're doing is showing me how little you understand about who I am and what I've accomplished." Her face went pale, then red. "You're lying. Richard said your business was failing, that you were practically bankrupt. Richard believed what he wanted to believe. The truth is that my business was acquired by a major corporation 4 months ago for $32 million. My current net worth is approximately $45 million. So, your offer of $2 million isn't just insulting, it's laughable." Eleanor's composure cracked completely. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is unacceptable. Richard deserves better than this. He gave you 8 years of his life. Richard gave me 8 years of resentment, manipulation, and betrayal. He tried to sabotage my business. He timed the divorce for when he thought I was at my weakest. He served me papers at Christmas dinner in front of his entire family, trying to humiliate me publicly. And he did all of this with your encouragement. I was protecting my son. You were poisoning him against me from the moment we got married. Sarah Mitchell told me you threatened to cut Richard out of your will if he stayed with me. You couldn't stand that your son married someone you considered beneath your social class. And when my business started succeeding, when I started becoming someone with real wealth and influence, you couldn't handle it. So you pushed Richard to leave me, convinced him he deserved better, manipulated him into making the worst mistake of his life." Eleanor's hands were shaking with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about. I wanted what was best for Richard. You were changing him, making him into someone I didn't recognize. You were too ambitious, too focused on your career, not enough attention on your marriage and family. By family, you mean you. You wanted Richard's wife to be someone who would defer to you, who would treat you as the matriarch, who would know her place. But I was never that person, Eleanor. I was someone with my own dreams, my own goals, my own path, and you couldn't tolerate it." Patricia spoke up for the first time. "Mrs. Morrison, I think this meeting is over. Your offer has been rejected, and frankly, Attempting to bribe my client to alter a legally binding divorce settlement could be considered interference with a judicial proceeding. Eleanor turned her fury on Patricia. Don't threaten me, young lady. Do you have any idea who I am? The connections I have? I could make one phone call and ruin your career. Actually, Patricia said, calmly, I know exactly who you are. And I also know that your family fortune is considerably smaller than it used to be. Your late husband made some poor investments before he passed, and your lifestyle has been draining your assets faster than they can recover. You're still wealthy by most standards, but you're not nearly as powerful as you like people to believe. Eleanor's face went from red to white. How dare you investigate me? When I'm a lawyer representing a high-net-worth client in a contentious divorce. Of course I investigated the opposing party's family. It's my job. And what I discovered is that you've been living on borrowed prestige for years, making threats you can't back up, trying to maintain an image of power that doesn't reflect reality. I stood up, facing Eleanor across the conference table. Here's what's going to happen. The divorce will be finalized exactly as outlined in the settlement Richard already agreed to. He gets nothing except what he brought into the marriage, which is almost nothing. The house is mine. The assets are mine. Everything I built is mine. And if you or Richard attempt to interfere with this process in any way, if you try to retaliate against me or spread lies about me, I will make sure every detail of Richard's affair, his attempts to sabotage my business, and your manipulation becomes public knowledge. You wouldn't dare. Try me. I have documentation of everything. I have witness statements from Sarah Mitchell. I have evidence of Richard's ethics violations at his former employer. I have records of conversations where Richard admitted to timing the divorce to take advantage of what he thought was my financial vulnerability. If you push me, Eleanor, I will bury your family's reputation so thoroughly that no amount of old money connections will save you. We stared at each other across the table, and I saw the moment Eleanor finally understood. She had underestimated me, just like Richard had. She had thought she could intimidate me, buy me off, make me disappear quietly. Instead, she had walked into a room with someone who was wealthier, smarter, and far more prepared than she had imagined. Possible. This isn't over, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Yes, it is. Go home, Eleanor. Take care of your son. Help him rebuild his life and maybe learn from his mistakes. But stay out of mine. If I never see or hear from you again, it will be too soon. Eleanor grabbed her purse and stormed out of the office, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Patricia and I sat in silence for a moment, then simultaneously released the breath we'd been holding. That went better than I expected, Patricia said with a slight smile. I thought she might actually try to physically attack you at one point. She's a bully who's used to people backing down. She couldn't handle someone standing up to her. The divorce will be finalized by the end of the week. Richard signed all the papers yesterday. His lawyer confirmed he's accepting. Everything without further contest. Congratulations, Catherine. You're officially free. I should have felt elated, but instead I just felt tired. Thank you, Patricia, for everything. I couldn't have gotten through this without your help. You did the hard part. You protected yourself, gathered evidence, made smart decisions. I just provided legal framework. What will you do now? Live my life. Focus on my business. Figure out who I am without Richard. Maybe eventually find real love with someone who actually deserves it. We shook hands, and I left the office feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The constant tension of a failing marriage. The pressure of trying to be someone I wasn't. All of it lifted away. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Webb. Catherine, I wanted you to know that the board officially terminated Richard's employment today. We've also discovered some concerning financial irregularities in his expense reports that we're referring to authorities. I thought you should be aware, in case he contacts you looking for help or money. You owe him nothing. Take care of yourself. So Richard's downfall was complete. He had lost his marriage, his job, his reputation, and now potentially faced legal consequences for his financial misconduct. I should have felt satisfaction, but mostly, I just felt sad for the waste of it all. If Richard had simply been honest, if he had worked on his insecurities instead of letting them destroy him, if he had chosen growth over fear, none of this would have happened. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. Richard's choices were his own, and he would have to live with the Consequences. I walked out of the building into bright afternoon sunshine. The city stretched out around me, full of possibility and promise. I pulled out my phone and made a call to my business partner, James Bike, someone who had been supportive through this entire ordeal. James, it's done. The divorce is finalized. I'm officially free. Congratulations. This calls for a celebration. Are you free tonight? Actually, I am. Completely free. No obligations, no drama, no looking over my shoulder waiting for the next disaster. Perfect. I'm organizing a small gathering at the Heights. Just some friends and colleagues who have been wanting to celebrate your acquisition deal. No pressure. Just good people who genuinely care about you. Will you come? I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Yes, I'll be there. And James, thank you for being there. Through all of this. That's what real friends do, Catherine. We show up. We support each other. We celebrate the victories and help through the defeats. See you tonight. That evening, I dressed carefully in a stunning emerald dress that I had bought for myself weeks ago but never had the courage to wear. It was bold, beautiful, and unapologetically eye-catching. The old Catherine would have worried it was too much, would have wondered what Richard would think. The new Catherine didn't care about anyone's opinion except her own. The gathering at the Heights was perfect. 20 people who genuinely cared about me, who celebrated my success without jealousy, who asked about my well-being without judgment. We talked about business opportunities, shared stories, laughed until our sides hurt. For the first time in years, I felt completely myself. No performance required, no pretense necessary. Near the end of the evening, Diana from the marketing firm pulled me aside. Catherine, I have to tell you something. What you did, standing up to Richard and his family, handling everything with such dignity and strength, it inspired a lot of people. I've had 3 women contact me this week saying your story gave them courage to leave bad relationships or stand up to people who were undermining them. You're becoming a role model, whether you intended to or not. I just did what I had to do to protect myself. Exactly. And that's the lesson. You didn't accept being treated badly. You didn't settle for less than you deserved. You showed that success and dignity can coexist, that being kind doesn't mean being weak. That matters to people. As I drove home that night, I reflected on everything that had happened. 3 weeks ago, I had been sitting in a restaurant, being served divorce papers by a husband who thought I was bankrupt and worthless. Tonight, I was driving home from a celebration surrounded by people who valued me, with a business worth millions, with complete freedom to build whatever life I chose. The divorce had been painful, but it had also been necessary. It had forced me to confront hard truths about my marriage, about Richard, about myself. It had taught me that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let go of something that isn't working, even when it hurts. Richard had thought he was discarding someone broken and desperate. Instead, he had freed someone powerful and capable. His loss was complete, and his regret would last a lifetime. But that was his journey to walk, not mine. My journey was just beginning. I had a business to grow, opportunities to explore, friendships to deepen, and eventually, love to find with someone who would truly appreciate the woman I had become. Someone who would celebrate my success instead of resenting it. Someone who would stand beside me as an equal partner, instead of trying to diminish me to feel bigger. As I pulled into my apartment building, I looked up at the city skyline, lights twinkling like stars against the dark sky. Somewhere out there, Richard was probably drowning his sorrows, realizing the magnitude of what he had lost. Eleanor was probably plotting some new scheme that would never materialize, and I was here, free and whole and ready for whatever came next. The card I had used at the restaurant, the one that had shocked everyone and revealed my true success, sat in my wallet as a reminder, not of wealth or status, but of what I had built through determination, intelligence, and hard work. I had earned every dollar, every achievement, every moment of success, and no one, not Richard, not Eleanor, not anyone, could ever take that away from me. I walked into my apartment, kicked off my heels, and stood by the window looking out at the city I loved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new possibilities. But tonight, I just wanted to appreciate this moment. The moment when I finally understood that I didn't need Richard's approval, Eleanor's acceptance, or anyone's validation. I had myself. I had my success. I had my dignity and strength. And that was more than enough. The divorce papers Richard had served me on Christmas evening had been meant as an ending, a final humiliation. Instead, they had been a beginning. The beginning of my real life. Lived on my own terms, answering to no one but myself. I raised a glass of wine to my reflection in the window, to the woman who had survived betrayal and emerged stronger, to the woman who had built an empire while others tried to tear her down, to the woman who had the courage to walk away from what wasn't working, and the wisdom to build something better. Here's to new beginnings, I said softly to the empty apartment, and to never again making myself small so someone else can feel big. Outside, the city lights sparkled like promises of everything yet to come, and inside, I smiled, knowing that whatever the future held, I was ready for it. Completely, absolutely, triumphantly ready.